Are you looking to get into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's Regulation G format? Then I have the perfect video for you. Today, we're going to be going over how to use every restricted Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet's Regulation G format. If you enjoy, of course, remember to like and subscribe. And unfortunately, Kurt is pretty sick this week, which is why I decided to take on a video that will require a little bit less editing. So feel free to just listen or to just check out the resources. I'm going to try and go as in-depth as possible while also keeping this video hopefully under an hour because there's a lot of teams to go over. And to save a little bit of time, we're going to be trimming out any restricted Pokemon that are so inconsequential in the sense that they either are Pokemon that require form changes like Calyrex, Necrozma, and Kyurem because you just use the other forms instead. And also for any forms of those Pokemon or any other form-related Pokemon, like the origin forms especially, where I will just be going over the best form for them, because for example, if I have the choice between Dialga and Dialga Origin, I can probably just use the same team for that and just slot in the other form if I really chose to. And I'll go over where these changes can be made on each different team. We're going to go over these teams based on the archetype that they provide, so that way then you guys at home can kind of get the best potential options for just figuring out what you want to run and how you want to run it. With that said though, of course, we're starting off today with the Cosmoem, because technically speaking, Cosmoem is unfortunately a usable Pokemon. I don't mean in the sense that you should be using it, but I was building a lot of these teams with Faye. Most teams are built by myself and Faye together, with most of the input coming from Faye, because Faye has played a lot more of the ladder than I have, and is just a better builder than I am. But I did still offer a lot of input where I could, obviously. But we'll go over as well on teams where I didn't build them myself and who I got them from. For this team in particular though, this is mostly the Chop Across team, but we threw on Cosmoem over Ogerpon because honestly Pawknight can kind of just do a lot with Dozarkiri anyway, and it's still a really consistent line in this format. Despite the fact there's still a lot of second terrain, Pawknight is still a great opener for your team, and you can get a lot of mileage out of just leading off with Spinner Pow to clear that terrain, going for like an Outrage Dragonite, and then just really going ham with Dozo and Tatsugiri. This ends up being a choice scarf Tatsugiri though, mostly just because of the fact that I liked the Terra Ghost Chiampao with Focus Edge a bit more here. So we ended up going with Terra Blast Steel. This should be helpful for a lot of the Fluttermanes or the incoming Terra Fairy Dragon types in the format. And your speed tier is actually pretty good for a lot of them if they're not running Scarf. We have the Glimmora here with the Meteor Beam set. This Terra Grass helps a lot because just with the amount of ground types going around like Landorus and Groudon, this is a pretty useful typing to have, and it can cause some serious 50-50s there. And then finally, of course, we have the little Ogerpon. I went with Terra Grass here. I'll be honest, you could probably go with any good defensive Terra typing here, and you'll get some mileage. I went with Grass mostly to avoid Spore immunity, so that way then I can just keep this thing going for Cosmic Powers, and hopefully keep it as healthy as possible. Obviously, Ogerpon is not going to be good here. However, it's technically speaking a usable pick, and at the very least, despite the fact that I think it is the worst Pokemon like stat-wise and move pool-wise, unironically, I don't think it's the one with the least practical use. We'll get into that in a bit though. But this is going to be a nice way to start off our more defensive archetypes. Moving on, we do have one other team in this archetype, and this is actually going to be our Lugia team. For these very, very bulky teams, these ones definitely are the two that trend more towards stall, because the goal is to try and use Glimmora as that stall piece to win you the game. And with this team in particular, it's kind of the best way to use Lugia. We lean all in with the stall aspect here though, unlike with the other team with Pawknight. This is a very much built around Lugia sort of team, trying to get the win as slowly as possible and essentially hoping your opponent chokes, because unfortunately Lugia cannot actually win a game. In theory, you could maybe still go with like Pawknight over like Wo-Chien and Incineroar. The issue being though is that you're now hurting your Lugia. It's not as big of a deal with Cosmoem because you typically don't lead Cosmoem. It's always there to be a T-Spike backline, so that way then you could stall your opponent in theory due to your high defenses and potential to Terra out of a bad situation. With Lugia though, it's unironically probably a really strong lead for your team and something you typically will not be cleaning a game with. Even if you do choose to lead against it, or I should say lead without Lugia, it's a very difficult Pokemon to kind of pull up in the endgame, and usually it would force you to lead off with one of Tondozo or Tatsugiri, unfortunately. I don't really recommend the team, I'll be honest, but this is probably the most viable way to get use out of the Lugia. The Terra Fairy is at least a good defensive type into Wicked Blow or Shifu, and your speed is good for creeping Pokemon like Chiyu. I didn't really think it was good to check for the Landorus speed tier, because one, you'll Calm Mind through it anyway, and it's not as threatening pre-Terra to you. And post-Terra, I mean, while you are weak to Sludge Bomb at the same time though, it still would need to be able to break through your defenses. And realistically, I think that the Chiyu at least is a much better enabler for that. Also, Chiyu is going up a lot in usage anyway this format. This Cover Cloak is really decent too. It's good for the fake out option, but it also is more important, honestly, for getting around your speed tier, because especially with the fact that you are hitting around this 168 mark, if you were to drop in speed, you're suddenly losing to Pokemon like really fast Raging Bolts and really a lot of other good wall breakers. Lugia is objectively not good though, but if you are trying to use this team, this one has an unaware Dozo over the oblivious one we saw on the other team. The other team's goal was mostly just to use Dozo Giri in a more offensive light. This is kind of just here to exist in the field, take advantage of options like Incineroar and Wo-Chan for damage mitigation, have Lugia as a nice win con while having these two to benefit from the physical attacks, and then Dondozo with here just so you don't lose to setup Pokemon. Besides, I guess, like Meteor Beam Lunala, which is going to wreck through this team anyway. This team isn't good, I'll be honest, but it's probably the best way you're going to get to run Lugia. Moving away from the hard stall, we're going to start off with our first team, the Balance archetype. These definitely all end up proving to be really good, and the fact that Eternatus is somehow the worst of these four should really speak volumes, because I think that Eternatus actually is still a really good Pokemon, and it's something I would put in my top 10. We have 4 different restricted Pokemon that all sit on really good balance archetypes, and I think they all end up being in the top 10, and it's one of the few archetypes you could be running besides, I guess, technically, like, Electric Terrain with Miraidon, because it's the only contender in that category, where I would actually say that the entire group is a top 10 archetype. And starting off, we do have Eternatus. Now, this is a team built by my good pal Robin. Shoutouts to Robin for passing me this team. It's a pretty good balance around Eternatus, and this Eternatus is really valuable on this team, actually. Typically, on these Torn Shifu teams, you're going to see a Scar for Shifu, but this actually takes advantage of the Focus Sash, allowing you to make sure you're guaranteed taking a hit. This gets you really good Detect turns, because this team does not have a lot of forms of Protect. Our only other options would be the Landorus with Protect, as this Tornadus is built around Rain, which is a really great enabler actually for not only this or Shifu Rapid, but it's also good into a lot of the Groudon teams, because Groudon teams do have options like Raging Bolt that could potentially cause some issues with Eternatus, especially since we do not have a Dragon-type move like Dynamax Cannon or Dragon Pulse. This Eternatus, though, even still, is a really great damage mitigator. We're able to outpace Pokemon like Whimsicott, which, at the very least, it doesn't cause the most offensiveness against our team, but with the Terra Dark, we can kind of just force it to not go for things like Encore into us, which is pretty valuable, actually, because Encore and Whimsicott could be kind of annoying. And having that Terra Dark typing does make us weaker to Moonblast, though, so being able to outpace Whimsicott is a pretty good benchmark here, especially because it will be a Tailwind setter, and we have Tailwind to mirror that. With its Tornadus as well, it's just a really good bulky piece. This is able to take hits from really most physical threats in the tier. And we have options like Incineroar as well to mitigate that damage from physical options. This Incineroar is going to be Terra Grass in particular. A lot of the other ones we're going to see today are going to be Terra Ghost to get around Fake Out. But in this team, it's really nice to get around a lot of different water types, as well as Pokemon like Groudon that might be able to get off of really strong Precipice Blades. We can Terra and at least cause 150-50, and if that's enough to get a knockoff against like a Clear Amulet, we can then switch out and then have this again to drop attack. And from there, this is a huge benefit that Incineroar can now provide against a Pokemon that it otherwise would not have done much. I haven't really touched much on the Landorus. This is a substitute Landorus. It's just max speed, max special attack. Really simple, but the sub is really nice on a team like this where we have a lot of pieces that would cause Protect turns, and having the Landorus, especially to take advantage of that and get a substitute off, is really valuable. And then this Rillaboom was high horsepower. This is mostly just to handle a lot of different Pokemon that would be checking Rillaboom potentially. And the Grass and Fire, well, the Grass and Ground, I should say, with Terra Fire is a really difficult combination to handle. While you could definitely make a case for going with U-Turn, I think it would still fit nicely on this team. This particular one ran high horsepower, and it's done really well. This is a very difficult team to take on, in my opinion. Though, I would say, of all of our balances, it's also the one that probably has the highest potential to go wrong. And that's why I rank it the lowest. Eternatus in itself is a really good anti-meta Pokemon. I think it has a lot to offer in this format. The issue being, though, is it's also a very difficult Pokemon to run, unfortunately, just because of the fact that you are weak to options like Groudon, all the dragons, etc. But I think it's one of those things where in the hands of a really strong player, this team could go super far. And I really do think it has a lot to offer to this format. Up next for our balances, we have Zama plus Good Stuff. Now this one definitely skews a bit more offense, but the way you kind of play it is really just mostly Switch Wars, trying to lean into the balance until you could just win with your 3 offensive pieces, being Fluttermane with just going to be a Boost Energy support set, going with that really fast Icy Wind to allow our other options to do some good work here. We don't really need the Fluttermane as a good damage breaker, in all honesty. We have a lot of other good offense in this team anyway, such as our Terra Dark, Focus Sash, or Shifu, which is going to be a great wall breaker for options like the Calyrexes. And overall, this is a fantastic partner with Zamazenta, in my opinion. We have Raging Bolt as well, which is going to be an AV set. It's going to be great. It's, again, the speed control aspect with Electro Web, really allowing our Zamazenta to go as far as possible while still having Thunderclap for nice priority. This Terra Fairy helps a lot with 50-50s into Pokemon like Miraidon and Koraidon, and it can really be a big difference maker into winning those 1v1s, and it's also great just into most Pokemon in the format because it's a great defensive type. For our more balanced aspect, though, we do still have options like Rillaboom, which this is going to be a taunt set because our team is very fast. It might not look like it, but with options like Raging Bolt and Fluttermane to mitigate speed, as well as Pokemon like Zamazenta Zamazenta and Urshifu to benefit from being fast, this is definitely a very weak team to options like Ferrari and Kali Ice, so having this taunt to mitigate Trick Room is very valuable. We still do have priority in Glide and Fake Out, so we can still stop a lot of teams, put up some good pressure, and with Terra Normal, we can also help our matchup against the Psyspam teams, specifically Calyrex Astral Barrage, which is definitely pretty damning here. We also do have the Terra Ghost and Incineroar. As I mentioned, this is going to be common on a lot of the other teams. This one in particular actually ditches Knockoff because we do have the Urshifu already for a much more potent Dark type. But instead, we actually go with Will-O-Wisp, which is going to be great for burning most physical threats here. And this Shuckleberry should help a lot with our Groudon matchup because it's pretty bad. Finally, though, we do have the Zamazenta, and this takes advantage of a lot of other pieces. For example, we can typically go for things like Wide Guard and allow options like Urshifu to now dent the Calyrex Ice without punishment. We can go for options like Wide Guard against Groudon, take Precipice Blades, allow Rillaboom to completely massacre it without punishment, or if it's, let's say, Terra Fire set, we could still go into Raging Bolt and just start blowing it back without punishment. This is a really good option. I found this able to very easily set up on options like Calyrex Ice without any fear, and you could usually 1v1 it, barring a really well-played Terra. And I mean like a really well-played Terra. You would need to go for some sort of fighting resistance, which typically does not happen. You would also most likely need to be going for some sort of setup of your own on Calyrex, as you will typically never be in a position where Calyrex will outset you up without some sort of Pokemon like a Decorate partner like Smeargle. This is really decent. Fake Out especially doesn't really do a lot to this because you do have the Terra Ghost to help prevent it if you do care about it on a given turn. And this overall is just a really damning wall breaker, as well as just a really damning wall. It's really good to set up and just body press through most Pokemon. A lot of things are pretty weak to it. And I found this probably to be one of the biggest surprises of the tournament. Well, not the tournament, of the laddering run I did yesterday. I think this Pokemon could go far. I think a lot of people are sleeping on the Zamazenta Crown, and it's a really potent option in my opinion, and I think a lot of you guys should consider on your teams. We do have two more balances to go over though, and this is where we start to get into Pokemon that I would consider like top 5 in the format. Starting off with Lunala. Now, I've had a lot of faith in Lunala. I think it's a really good check to Pokemon like Calyrex in the format, but it's been surprising. I would say it's even past my expectations for it personally, as I did not think Lunala would be good in this format at all until we got the second restricted. But Lunala's been really terrifying. This is the best Wide Guard Pokemon in the format outside of maybe like Mienshao or other non-restricteds that are just a little bit more splashable with options like Calyrex to fix their matchups. But Lunala offers a lot of things that these Pokemon don't, namely in the fact that they are also able to set Trick Room with Lunala, which allows you a really good Pokemon that can block opponents' spread moves, set your own speed control, which is really useful against a lot of the Tailwind in this format, as this team also does not look like it's a Tailwind team, but it's good into those teams that have Tailwind. And then we also have a really great way to boost our offense thanks to Meteor Beam. This Lunala should be able to take hits very comfortably, even from like choice specs Calyrex, from like partners with like Chiyu, for example. So this is a pretty easy way to just kind of revenge off opponents and really get you back to the field position very easily. And Terra Fairy typing helps a lot into Pokemon like Urshifu, Calyrex, and many others. That Terra Fairy typing on a Shadow Shield option, which is just better multi-scale. It can't even be broken by like Mold Breaker. Fucking insane. We have Raging Bolt as well with the Terra Fairy. Again, really bulky option with potential for Electro Web in case you want to get a speed control that's not Trick Room. We have a Mungus here, which is great redirection. This particular team has Terra Dark to help a bit more with their Calyrex matchup in case of Lunala's not present, as this team is definitely pretty weak to it for sure. And then we have a really strong offensive backline with Landorus, which is a Terra Poison substitute Landorus with Earth Power, Sludge Bomb, Sub, and Protect, able to take advantage of a lot of Pokemon like Raging Bolt with just really good potential for a Thunderclap. So we can take advantage of that, pick off the faster offensive pieces and go for a nice substitute here. Or even Rage Powder or Mungus that can just redirect targets or put them to sleep even with Spore. We have Chien-Pao as a really good option, and this leads very well with most Pokemon on the team, able to clear through most incoming enemies. This actually should be Ice Spinner. I don't know why it's Icicle Crash still, because we don't have Terrain on the team, and this is a great way to remove potential Terrain. We could still definitely take advantage of Terrain though, as options like Lunala are still weak to priority, but this is most likely going to be the Terramon in most games, so it's not as big of a deal. This Chien-Pao overall, it was a really great option for us to Terra Ghost, and it helps also with enabling damage for Iron Boulder, which has actually been a surprisingly good pick on this team. I found it's great to fix matchups like Incineroar, and really against most common Intimidate Pokemon, you're going to be able to make Iron Boulder work. This Mighty Cleave as well is great to break through protects, and if we play this well next to Pokemon like a Mungus, we can set up Sword Stances, and it is a very difficult Pokemon to take down at +2. Against teams like Miraidon as well, this is one of the fastest Pokemon in the matchup, really only being outpaced by like Iron Bundle, and that's about it. And this team has a great way around Iron Bundle through not only the Raging Bolt, but also through the Wide Guard Lunala, making this Iron Boulder actually a far more terrifying Pokemon. I found this to be a really terrifying team in my opinion, and I think of the teams themselves, it's probably one of the strongest teams on the entire list today. Faye and I had a lot of fun building this one, and I think it really could go far. Like, this is probably one of the few teams I would say I fully could expect someone to bring to a really high level tournament and actually just make a strong run. Most of these teams are definitely going to be built for ladder, but I have hopes in this one. I think this one's actually a really incredible team. And if anyone tries this out in any sort of major events, let me know. I'd love to see how it does in like a regional or like a major tournament. For our final balance team, they actually got this one from an online tournament where they ended up seeing someone else run it and do really well, which is going to be a Terapagos team. Now this features a Covert Cloak Terapagos, which is able to take advantage of a lot of different Pokemon that would try and fake out to break your Terra Shift. You could still go for Calm Minds on them pretty easily and then recover it back pretty comfortably with things like Grassy Terrain Rillaboom, or with your Floral Healing Comfey, I should say, with the Terra Steel typing. This Trick Room option allows us a great way to underpace most Pokemon with Terapagos, since we do it 72 speed. Well, actually not 72, because this is going to be for the Stellar form. I think that hits around... I'm actually forgetting where this hits, but it's definitely under 100. And this Calm Mind Terra Starstorm is a really great way to just kind of win back games very quickly. We have Incineroar as a great damage mitigator here with Intimidate and Parting Shot, allowing us a great way to stop incoming enemies, while also having Taunt for the archetypes like Calyrex Ice that would be slower Trick Room teams than us. We have Sableye for screens, which is pretty useful. This is a great way around Calyrex as well, because we can go for the Incineroar Parting Shot into Sableye, go for Foul Play and Light Screen combination, and just kind of win that way. We could also just Foul Play Calyrex before Intimidates, though this is more so our backup to like Clear Amulet sets, if anything, and the Terra Steel helps a lot with the incoming fairies. Rillaboom is our great way to the Terapagos mirrors, but it's also just a really good partner with Incineroar and Rillaboom. These three are a fantastic duo, and you really can get a lot of mileage out of them. This team is just built around keeping Terapagos alive and just making sure that you're doing more damage than your opponents, which with Terapagos is actually very easy. This Pokemon will go down a lot in quality once the second restrictor gets introduced, because Terapagos will be a lot less free of a Terra Pokemon, but in a format like this, these are all Pokemon that almost never really need to Terra. Urshifu is probably the one that would like to Terra the most out of these five, but even still, without being on a rain team, it's not nearly as important, and Urshifu's job here is more so just to break Terra Shift and to help break down Incineroar a bit quicker before it can Intimidate cycle through the team and then bully options like Rillaboom in the endgame. But even still, I mean, this Terapagos will most likely win you games, and I think overall the team does a great job at damage mitigating for it. Alright, up next, the next archetype we're going to go over is pretty simple. This is Psyspam. This has two different teams for it. The first one is the Gimmick team, because we're building around Mewtwo, which is one of the worst restricteds you could be using. Of the options that I actually built a team around, this is the third worst restricted, because I did not build teams around Cosmoem, base Calyrex, base Kyurem, base Necrozma, or base Giratina, because the origin form is actually a lot better right now, and I'll get into that in a bit when we get to Giratina, though that is definitely towards the end of the video. But this Mewtwo is some serious stuff. I think this is the best way to run it, because with Terra Ghost, you suddenly become a Calyrex check. We have Knockoff, which should be able to OHKO pre-Terra. They're not going to really anticipate it, so you just go for the Knockoff and you claim a kill. They can't unnerf through it as well, which is great. We have Icy Wind, which is decent speed control, and the Scarf Mewtwo is pretty fast. We have Earthquake though, and you might be wondering, why the fuck are we running Earthquake? This Expanding Force seems pretty obvious, despite the fact that we are running two physical moves, but why the fuck are we running Earthquake? And that's pretty simple, actually. It's to help this little Armourouge here. Now, astute players may be seeing that we do have a weak armor set with Terra Dark. This is great for the Calyrex matchup, as well as the fact that we do have Wide Guard, making this an actually viable Pokemon again, because Armourouge has that merit over Iron Crown, where you can Wide Guard through opponents and actually do some serious damage. We have this Armourouge, though, that is built around the Earthquake from Mewtwo, or the U-turn from Iron Jugulus, allowing us a great way to break through our weakness policy, and get some really serious boosts with Stored Power and Expanding Force. Stored Power is especially useful in this format. A lot of Pokemon are running Wide Guard. Again, I cannot stress that enough. Lunala is running it, Zamazenta is running it, we have Mienshao that's running it. There's a lot of Wide Guard, and it's pretty good. It's probably one of the best support moves you could be running right now. As far as support, really, I think the only other moves that are probably better are like Rage Powder, Trick Room, and Tailwind, and then Wide Guard is probably right up there. But on this team in particular, it's really good. We have options like Trick Room and DD as well, in case we can't pop the weakness policy weak armor, because Armourouge is still a decent option with Stored Power and expanding, well, not Stored Power, but Expanding Force and Trick Room, allowing us, despite the fact that we do hit 127 speed, to still underpace the majority of the format. We still have Urshifu, which is a great enabler for getting that Trick Room up. The Adamant max speed is mostly here to take advantage of Mewtwo's Icy Wind, actually, because at -1, we actually do outpace Calyrex perfectly with this by 1 point exactly, allowing us a free Wicked Blow into that, or if they go for a defensive Terra that might be like a Terra Fighting or a Terra Water, we still have close combat, especially for that Terra Fighting set. Finally, we have Wellpawn, mostly here for redirection. It's a great redirector. It's probably one of the best redirectors. It's not a Mungus, though having a Mungus on Psyspam is pretty bad. With the Terra Water Ogre Pawn, though, we can at least boost our special defense a little bit to help take on that expanding force a bit better. And this also helps a lot with different armorers checks, mostly like Terra Fire Pokemon that would try and sponge through Heat Wave, allowing us a really good win con, actually. I think this team, despite the fact that it is objectively a gimmick team, actually is a surprisingly good option for it. I think you could at minimum try and breeze through the low ladder with this if you're trying to get started on the ladder. You know, find what works for you and try and at least get up to like 1150, 1200 before you start using serious teams against players who are also using serious teams. I won't act like this will carry you to number 1 or anything. Frankly, this is probably still a pretty bad team. But at minimum, again, I can get through all the low ladder cheese pretty quickly. I found myself getting wins with this quicker than most of their builds we'll go over today, actually. But I'll touch on the team that I think is going to be the best for low ladder farming in a bit. For now, though, this Mewtwo team is pretty good. Now, when I mentioned Psyspam was coming, we do have the very obvious Psyspammer. And this doesn't actually need Psyspam, though. But this particular team, I think, is one of the best ways to run it. And it's due to the fact that a lot of people do not have their teams ready to calc for this Pokemon, being the Calyrex Shadow Rider. Now, obviously, you're thinking to yourself already that, oh, you know, everyone has a Calyrex Shadow check. Not this team. Not this team, I promise you. We have Tornadus here, obviously. This is just a great support Tornadus, able to take hits from most Pokemon. Bleak Wind is great. We have Taunt as well, just as a nice way to help mitigate through opponents, especially if they're not furry or in psychic terrain. We have Protect here because Tornadus is still a floating Pokemon, so having that immunity to fake out in psychic terrain is still valuable. This Chi-Yu is a great damage enabler, and you might have noticed I skipped over Calyrex. Chi-Yu really does need to be introduced first here because it can take advantage a lot of our Trick Room, as well as the fact that it is a great way to mitigate opposing Calyrex. With the Dark Pulse and Heat Wave here, this is a great Pokemon overall as a wall breaker. And Terra Fire helps really lean into that damage against a lot of different checks to Calyrex, especially from it clicking Expanding Force. Things like Steel types, Dark types, Poison types. The Poison types wouldn't really matter for Dark Pulse, but mostly the Steel and Dark types, this Heat Wave will be immense damage for you. Now, we do obviously still have the Mon of the Hour, and again, very keenly astute people might notice that we skipped over it. We still have a couple other targets to go over first. This Wellpawn is great for redirection. Again, really good Pokemon on Psyspam for redirection. It's probably a really nice Pokemon to have on just most teams right now. Besides like Raging Bolt and Miraidon matchups, this is kind of free. We have Indeedee, which is a great redirector. This one goes for Terra Water. You could also go with Terra Fairy in all honesty, but the Terra Water is still a really nice just blanket defensive typing, and a lot of people on Indeedee are prepping for Terra Fairy more than, not Fairy, yeah, they're prepping for Terra Fairy more than anything. With Terra Water in particular, this is designed more so to be like a rapid food check, and to just draw in those rapid food hits in case if Ogerpon dies. And then we have the Meowchow. I mentioned earlier, this is a really great way to just fake out pressure as well as feint to get through Protect, allowing our Calyrex much easier time. Wide Guard is great for the mirrors. Close combat should Oko Incineroar really easily, actually, if they don't go for Terra Ghost. The Inner Focus also gets around your Intimidate immunity, and you can't get flinched, meaning your Focus Sash is great. And then anything that would try and go for Wide Guard into you, typically these Pokemon do not have great single target options for Terra Grass, and this also helps with things like Spore Mungus. Now, again, we skipped over Calyrex very intentionally. That's because we're Choice Specs Calyrex. Everything on this team is built around Choice Specs Calyrex. We have Meowchow, great to kill any single dark or normal type that will get in your way, and they can't really damage mitigate it. We have Ogerpon and Indeedee, two really good redirectors that can draw in most hits. Ogerpon is a great Spit F wall, and Indeedee here is going to be drawing in any sort of normal type attack pre-Terra. We have Chi-Yu, which is going to be great at boosting your damage, and we have Tornadus to make you outpace pretty much anything viable. This thing is a fucking menace. We have Astro Barrage and Shadow Ball. These are the only two moves you really need to click. Despite being a Psychic Terrain team, that's more so as a bluff, especially for open sheet players, because they'll see Expanding Force, panic, bring their Rillaboom in the back line, and then die to a Specs, Astro Barrage, or Shadow Ball because you got your boost and you have next Chi-Yu. There's really not a lot to say about this. This thing is absurd, and the only reason we have Leaf Storm is frankly because it's still a decent option. You could still go with an option like Pollen Puff, for example. This is a great way to support allies. You could use this especially next to like a Wellpawn if you have a bad Cali matchup, which doesn't exist for the record, but if you do find a bad Cali matchup, it's decent for Wellpawn. Though Leaf Storm is still a great option because it helps punish it post-Terra, and next to Chi-Yu, you just flat out Oko it, even if it's really bulky Wellpawn post-Terra. So this move is kind of nuts. Honestly, this Calyrex is genuinely like an unfair Pokemon. It's everything that's wrong with the format, to be honest. And yeah, if you want a free team, this is a very free team to run it, because again, no one's running checks for Specs Calyrex. They're all calculating for like Life Orb or Focus Sash or like other items that are not specs, because typically players don't really want to lock specs, though it is so free in this format despite all the Terra Normal, because this team just punishes Terra Normal very well. Up next, we're going to go over Trick Room teams, starting off with this Necrozma Duskmane team. Now, this is definitely also a team that you could throw Solgaleo on, though we do have a separate Solgaleo team that I'll go over later on in this section. Necrozma Dusk is definitely the worst option in here, but Trick Room is still pretty good right now, actually. And I think Necrozma Dusk, despite the fact that it is not the best, it could still definitely work. And this Terra Grass set is basically just Solgaleo Light. We have a Sword Dance set with dual Stab and Protect. You might be wondering why we don't have a great option for things like Steel types, and that's because we actually partner this with a Blood Moon or Ursa Luna. This eviscerates any sort of check to the Necrozma Dusk main, and these three in particular form a really terrifying duo. The Farig in particular is really nice because you typically do want to have this Ghost and Normal Stab on Farig right now. The Ghost is going to be great for Calyrex, and the Hyper Voice is just a great way against most Pokemon as a nice blanket option. It's really hard to switch into this dual Stab, at least for neutral, and with the Safety Goggles, this helps a lot with our Trick Room matchup in tandem with the Terra Grass on Necrozma Dusk, allowing us an actual way to handle and circumvent through a Mungus very quickly. We still have Incineroar here as a nice fake out option. Again, the Terra Ghost set. This moveset is the standard, and we haven't really seen many Terra Ghost and Incineroar on these teams that have this moveset and Terra Ghost. But this is really the moveset that will probably, going forward, be on almost every team, because a lot of these don't really have like a Trick Room weak matchup, or they don't really have a weak matchup to physical threats that need burning. Specifically the pre-Terra ones, I should say, because the Terra Fire ones usually on those teams with the Wisp and Incineroar do get punished well anyway. We have a Mungus, which is a great redirector for Trick Room, and it's also just a great partner for Necrozma Dusk, specifically drawing in all those fire type attacks, as we can just go for Terra Water and eviscerate them anyway. And then we have a helmet, well, not a helmet, a booster speed Fluttermane designed to help give this Necrozma Dusk a little bit more of a Trick Room matchup outside of Trick Room, because late game we can just go with these two, go for an Icy Wind, and this suddenly starts outpacing Pokemon like Rillaboom and Raging Bolt that have low speed tiers, allowing us a very free turn to actually just go for Photon Geyser straight into them and murder. So this event's proven to be pretty terrifying. If you want a more serious Solgaleo team, you could also just throw Solgaleo on this set with like literally the same moveset, to be honest. Well, actually, I don't think Solgaleo gets Sword Dance, but even still, you could basically throw on like a Solgaleo on this team and it would still do a lot of work. The one issue being is just that it is a bit faster, but it still would function here. I mentioned that because, again, the Solgaleo team we built around, it's a little bit more of a fun team, so I did want to give that preface in case you aren't looking for a gimmick Solgaleo team, but I do think that Solgaleo team still is really terrifying. Since we are going over these Pokemon from worst to best of their archetype, we do have one more Pokemon to go over before we get into Solgaleo, though, and that's going to be Dialga Origin. Now, this is a pretty close contender to Solgaleo, but my biggest issue with Dialga Origin is the item lock. I do think despite the item lock, though, it's still pretty decent into most teams with the Adamant Crystal. This allows us for very high damage with that Dragon Pulse and Flash Cannon, and we still get some decent mileage out of that 120 Spadef. Unlike Dialga as well, Dialga definitely has a bit of item slot issues because Sylveus is not very good outside of the Dynamax format, and all the other items are typically taken up by other Pokemon that Dialga would want to partner with, allowing us Dialga Origin then. And I think by proxy, this proves to be a pretty decent option. Earth Power, Dragon Pulse, and Flash Cannon proved to be very terrifying with Trick Room, allowing us a great way to help boost Pokemon like this Ursa Luna, which actually is a lot of merit here. On a team like this especially that is very weak to Tropicos, this is a really good wall breaker for it, and it's probably one of the best ways to break through Tropicos in my opinion right now. Outside of maybe like a Lucky that is in terrain or like Helping Hand boost or something like that. This is nuts, and with Terra Ghost, it helps get around a lot of the fake out users that would try and stall through your Trick Room. We have Farig here, again, standard Farig. This one leans a bit more offensive because of the fact that this team doesn't have as native wall breakers as the other team did with the Sword Dance Solgaleo and the Blood Moon Ursa Luna. So this one wants a bit more offense here. We also have the Chi, which is a great damage enabler, as well as just a really good way for Trick Room teams to, well, this Trick Room team in particular, to get some good mileage, despite the fact that Chi is a faster Pokemon. This Terra Ghost is great at massacring through things in Trick Room that would otherwise be potentially going for fake out, things like Rillaboom, for example. Next to Farig, this is a pretty damning combination actually on lead. I've also noticed that this Fluttermane, again, is really good here. It partners well with the Dialga Origin. That still, it's a really reasonable speed tier. I will say, actually, this did remind me, though, I do want to bump up the speed by 2 points, because now we can take advantage of the, specifically of 2 Icy Winds, would allow Dialga Origin the ability to outpace the Cali Ghost, which is a pretty important benchmark to hit, actually. I've noticed that that is a pretty easy thing to do in most games. Just go for Icy Wind and then just go for attacks, and you can typically get that. Not only this, though, it's still really useful for a lot of other slower-ish Pokemon, but overall, this is still a really good option. I've noticed as well that with this Telepathy, you could really just start popping off Earthquakes on Ursa Luna, and these two make a very fantastic Trick Room duo. Finally, again, great Trick Room partner, Ogerpon Wellspring just proves to be a menace in this format. There's not really a lot to say about it. It just does the same Wellpon things that it was doing earlier. And overall, this is a really, really terrifying team, in my opinion. Moving on to our second to last Trick Room focused team, we do have Solgaleo, which I named Kingambit because it basically is functioning as Kingambit. This is a weakness policy set, and we actually build it around this and Hisui Zork. This Hisui Zork is a great U-turn pivot for the King Gambit, allowing us to get a very easy U-turn proc after a Terra Dark. This knockoff hits like a truck even before weakness policy though. I've noticed it can KO some Paragraphs from full, which is fucking nuts. We do have Fluttermane as a nice Icy Wind option, and you can potentially swap a move like Hyper Voice or even Shadow Sneak for that Icy Wind, allowing you a very free way to get more speed control, and it also bluffs Fluttermane very easily. I found that the Pokemon I am bluffing the most is in fact Fluttermane, because the Icy Winds turn 1 are really useful, but ultimately, again, the Shadow Ball Hyper Voice coverage is still really good in this format, and I found myself having to unfortunately give it up, though it's not bad, and I think depending on how you play the team, you can still make that work. There's another pretty big benefit though with this is the Shadow Sneak. That allows you a not Terra option on King Gambit, which is pretty good in my opinion. I've noticed that there are a lot of games where this dark typing can definitely hurt you, specifically against teams that are banking on like Wincon Fluttermane or like Koraidon. Having the neutrality to Koraidon at least and the resistance to Fluttermane is pretty good. We also have Porygon 2. This is another good Pokemon that Zoroark can bluff, and I found that this is also a very low drawback option that you could bluff, since the Pokemon in particular plays so vastly differently, and usually players would anticipate Trick Room going up with this Solgaleo, but instead they're going to get U-turned into the King Gambit and then just lose a Pokemon. We have really room for great Fake Out Pressure. Overall, just a really good option on this team. It's a great pivot. It's a great cleaner, and then Grim is also just great dual screens, allowing us to have even more success longevity-wise with King Gambit. And it's also a great side Sucker Punch option if really need be, though of all the Pokemon that would probably proc a weakness policy, this is the one to least likely do it. Terra Steel is great for Fluttermane, and overall this is just a really good support piece on this team. As I said, you could probably just throw on a similar set to the Solgaleo team, well, to the Duskmane team. The only thing is you can't go for Sword Stance because this Pokemon does not get Sword Stance, unfortunately. If you are looking for another setup option, you probably don't really have a good physical one, unfortunately, though you could use this as a good Wide Guard Pokemon on that team instead and try and go for a different support Pokemon. You could also throw Wide Guard on this team if you were interested, though I think in particular with how we're playing the team, this team benefits a little bit more from just going for Protect Solgaleo. It's still a decent Pokemon, and the full battle body especially makes his weakness policy very valuable, and it's a nice way to just kind of catch teams off guard. This is definitely more of a ladder team, though. I would never bring this to like an official tournament with Open Sheet. Now, finally, to round out our Trick Room teams, we do have Cali Ice. Now, Cali Ice has really no wrong partners. This is one of the best Pokemon in the format. Glacial Lance really does just kind of end games on its own, and most teams really do not have good coverage for it. Ferg is a phenomenal partner for this, and Ferg will only continue to go up in usage. I think this thing is going to be one of the best non-restricteds, personally. Easily in the top 10 in this format because it just partners so well with Calyrexes, it partners so well with really most Pokemon. It's low drawback as fuck. You have Hyper Voice and Shadow Ball, again, just really great for the Calyrex matchups. This one leans very heavily into damage because really on this sort of team, the goal is just to end the game as quickly as possible, and with the Throat Spray for a Rig, it does a good job at doing that. We have Urshifu, a great lead for this team to try and get up really good momentum early on, especially if Calyrex for some reason has a bad lead. Spoilers, it never has a bad lead. Ogerpon, Wellspring, again, great redirector on Trick Room. Fluttermane is great for Icy Wind, and it does allow this Calyrex in particular to really just start messing around with teams, especially after a single Icy Wind drop. And then finally in Incineroar, again, great damage mitigator. We see the stereotypical set. This one is safety goggles because this team is much more Trick Room oriented, and the team is a lot weaker to potential Amoonguss. Especially if they do go for things like Terra Water to take on Calyrex. It's probably going to be the best counter you'll find, though the Ogerpon Wellspring is a great way to just smash through that. This team is pretty deadly. I think it's very beginner friendly, and if you're looking to get a good use for Trick Room, this is probably as easy as it gets. If you can't play this, you really can't play this format. Alright, and moving out of Trick Room, we're going to get into our snow teams. Now, in particular, I think the Kyurems are both pretty evenly ranked. I think that Kyurem White is technically slightly better, but Kyurem Black has a lot of upsides, and I think this is a very slept on Pokemon right now that I think actually could do some serious damage if you were to use this. I found myself going undefeated when actually playing this team. It was one of the few teams that I went undefeated with when I was streaming the run for like 8 hours trying to test all of these teams. Before I just cut down to only one win. I got like 3 in a row with this very quickly. It took like 10 minutes. Very good team, and the Terra Electric Kyurem Black is pretty annoying to handle. We have Alola Ninetales here for pre-Terra. This allows Kyurem Black to get a really good defense boost, and this is already a really bulky Pokemon that gets kind of absurd when you hit 188 for, well, I think it's like 181 for your Phys Def stat with this 221 HP, and it's a very easy Dragon Dance option. You just go for like one Dragon Dance, and you outpace most Pokemon. I think it goes all the way up to Iron Bundle is where this hits. And then you have the Alola Ninetales to get your Phys Def boost, and also the Icy Wind is a great damage mitigator as well. Well, a great mitigator, I should say, to faster offensive pieces. We do have the Sinistcha here with Terra Normal. This is a great redirector for the Calyrex, specifically if they're going to go for single target moves. Even still, though, if you're drawing in a lot of options, you can just kind of take them in for most of these ghost types like Moongeist, Speed, Lunala, Fluttering with Shadow Ball, and just really start doing some serious damage. There's also a great Calm Mind piece I found behind Veil. This is a really decent win con, and it can put up a lot of pressure against bulky waters in case I want to set up with Kieran Black instead of maybe going for those Fusion Bolt turns. And it's also great for the ground type matchup as well. This helps a lot, especially in tandem with Incineroar. Again, the Parting Shot Incineroar, really invaluable here. We have Rapid Fu, the max speed again, just for Calyrex. We can clear through terrain, which is useful for things like the Psyche terrain, so we can go for Fake Out with Incineroar. It's great for the grassy terrain, so that way then we just take less damage with Rapid Fu. It's also really good, especially for the Miraidon teams, because those Miraidon teams really do not have a great line once their Pokemon like Bundle are slowed down, and I've Ice Spinnered on them, breaking a Focus Sash, allowing for Fusion Bolt to just guarantee a KO. Landorus is finally here for the Raging Bolt matchup, because it was probably like the worst matchup for this team, just Raging Bolt specifically. I wouldn't even say Miraidon, I think Urshifu handles that fine. It's specifically the Thunderclap, though this Terra Grass Urshifu also does help a lot with that. This team is really fucking good. I think if you're going to run Snow, this is probably as good as it gets for a Kieran Black team. I think it has a lot of merit. I'd be curious to see if it can get better from here, but the Sinistcha especially, I think, is truly like the best redirector partner for Kieran Black. It really leans to that bulk, and the goal of Kieran Black is just longevity, and I think if we do see Kieran Black, it's actually going to be tied to these two in particular, and I think we'll see maybe different partners for these last two spots, but the Incineroar, Sinistcha, Alolan Ninetales, and Kieran Black quad, I think is actually going to be really deadly, and I think it is here to stay all format in my opinion. Now this is another one of those teams that Faye ended up actually finding from a friend of theirs named Fangame10. This is called Frosty Fanwind. Essentially this is a Kieran White team built around Fan, which is the Alolan Ninetales. It's like the competitive short form for it. I'm forgetting what the word specifically is, but it's like the short form way of saying it. And this Fake Tears Alolan Ninetales is a great support for a Pokemon like Kieran White, for Fluttermane, and for Chiyu. I'll go over these sets more in depth in a bit. So the Fan aspect is really terrifying here. It's a great enabler for this Kieran White, and again, gets you the defense boost. This Fire and Ice Stab in particular is really deadly for a lot of teams, and it is a very difficult combination to switch on, especially considering your Ice Stab is both Freeze Dry for grading around those water types that would actually mutually check this, as well as for the Blizzard, which is just going to be a really good option with the Snow up. Blizzard is specifically why I think his Pokemon is better, because while Kieran Black does have the way to boost itself and have a better long-term return, I think Kieran White, especially just having the immediate payoff with the Alolan Ninetales, is really, really hard to understate. And with the pure Ice Terror typing, you just lean heavily into that Blizzard damage with the Life Orb. And we also do have the Tailwind Suicune, which is a great way to boost your speed with this. This Suicune in particular with Terra Dark is a great check to Calyrex, because you can just Tailwind up and snarl through it very quickly, as you do outpace Calyrex perfectly. The Kieran White is also great at just boosting through most Pokemon, and these two make a really good endgame, because if you get the Veil up, this is suddenly a really difficult to KO Suicune, and you can just kind of start going through teams. The Inner Focus means you can't get flinched, so your support is guaranteed with things like Helping Hand, though that would get around Fake Out anyway. But more importantly, the Scald and Snarl, allowing for damage mitigation on the physical and special side. We do have the Fluttermane, which is going to be a great speed control option with Icy Wind in case Alolan Ninetales dies, and the Taunt is also invaluable for trigger matchups. And we also have the Chiyu here, which is going to be a really good damage enabler with this Choice Spec set, allowing us for a nice Fake Out option, because we could just, well, an anti-Fake Out option with the Terra Ghost. Snarls, again, great damage mitigation, and we have 3 really powerful attacks. And then this Urshifu single with the Choice Scarf is a great means around most players. I was adjusting the spread. This is like the one big thing I changed, is I made this max speed, because despite the fact that obviously in theory Sash Calyrex could definitely bully this, at the same time most Calyrex are not running Sash. It's actually one of the less common items on it. So this Wicked Blow is very free, as well as close combat in case they're going for a Terra typing like Terra Fighting. So it is really important to make sure we do hit that speed benchmark. The Terra Dark just leans into that Wicked Blow damage. I think both these Kyurem teams are really good. I would say, though, they're definitely on the lower end of viability, definitely just under the top half, but they're still in the third tier of viability-ness, in my opinion. For our next category, we have Weatherless Tailwind. This is essentially any Tailwind team that did not fit into any other archetype that was not either a weather or a field control, and this starts off, of course, with this Palkia Origin team. Now, on face value, this might look like a rain team. This actually proves to be a weatherless team with the Terrafire Palkia. This proves to be very deadly, actually. The Fire, Ground, and Dragon is really, really hard to switch around. And with this hitting 189, we actually do have a Fluttermane at 190, allowing us a great Icy Wind Pokemon that can just creep this perfectly, allowing us the Icy Wind to go off first every single time for Palkia's benefit. We still have a lot of benefits here, though, with Moonblast and Dousing Gleam being great clearing options, and Shadow Ball is great for the Calyrex. We have Tornadus here, which is a really good support piece. We opt for Foul Play here over something like a Weather, because the Calyrex matchup is kind of grim, and having this is a great way to just Foul Play through it is very nice. We have our tried and true trio of Rillaboom with high horsepower, mostly to help with the fire type matchup, because again, a lot of the fire types would take advantage of this team, especially since we do not have a water move on our Palkia. So having just another means to damage them in case of earth power does not do enough is important. We have Rapid Fu, a really great way to handle those fire and ground types again. And the Surging Strikes is really valuable here. Terra Grass is mostly for Raging Bolt. This team doesn't really care about going for Ice Spinner because we have Rillaboom, so instead we're going to go for Aqua Jet as a nice means of priority. And this Incineroar, again, just a really good damage mitigator. This one goes for Taunt over Flare Blitz, actually, which is the only team to dish Flare Blitz, if I remember correctly, and that's because we have the Terrafire Palkia. So Faye and I decided that we could just go for Taunt instead on this, because this is a very fast team that would very quickly die to Trick Room. So against any sort of Trick Room team, you kind of just need to lead this and go for Taunt and hope that you can call it right. And if not, then you just need to somehow live a few turns, which is pretty difficult to do. I think Palkia, even besides this, the base form of Palkia is a little bit too slow in this format, but it's also too fast to be a good Trick Room setter like it usually is. It's not as valuable for the Groudon Kyogre matchup because Kyogre is just not that good right now. If Kyogre does go up in usage, Palkia will probably go up too, because of the fact that Koraidon is so not good compared to Groudon, and Groudon is definitely the premier setter there for sure. But I think Palkia will get a lot better once specifically the base form, I should say, will get a lot better once things like Groudon and Palkia cores can return. I still think that Palkia overall is probably the worst option in these like non-weather Tailwind teams, and I think even if we ran a more normal Palkia, it would be pretty hard to justify it just over other water types right now, because even despite the fact that I think Kyogre is kind of mid, it's still definitely a better water, and the water dragon typing is just not that good in this format. Next, we actually skip a lot of placements and go all the way up into our top half from our bottom half. And Ho-Oh, this proves to be a very terrifying team. This is manual Tailwind Ho-Oh, which proves to be very powerful because you really just need Brave Bird and Sacred Fire. And this Terra Grass typing helps against a lot of things like Defensive Terra Amoonguss going for Spore and Rage Powder, as well as for other Pokemon like Raging Bolt, you get a resistance to Thunderclap. You also get a resistance to Urshifu Rapid. And from full health too, despite the fact that this looks like it's a very not bulky Pokemon, you can actually take hits from things like Calyrex Shadow, despite the fact you have pretty much no investment, because it's just that naturally bulky on the Spadef side. Clear helps a lot with the damage mitigation from Pokemon like Incineroar, and we do have our own Incineroar here just to be safe. This one opted for Flare Blitz because we're not as Trick Room weak. Ho is a pretty decent option still at breaking through most Trick Room cores, and also the Incineroar can definitely put up some decent pressure here as well. The fact that Tailwind is much more of a choice here, allowing us for options like Pow to maybe boost damage to break through those setters very quickly, it helps a lot, and we don't need the Taunt as much, though you could still definitely run Taunt over Flare Blitz if you chose. With this GM Pow especially, is a great booster for really everything on this team not named Fluttermane, and it's just standard offensive Terra Ghost / Pow. We have a Scar for Shifu, again, Terra Grass, very common set right now. It's probably the best that you could run on a Shifu Rapid just for the Raging Bolt counter, or most of the Raging Bolt check, I should say, with Terra Grass, and you can still blow through most partners. We have a Rillaboom here with Terra Fairy, actually, because this team is definitely not going to do the best into most of those dragons, so at least having a way to resist the stab is nice, especially for options, again, like Raging Bolt, Miraidon, etc. High Horsepower is going to be great, especially into those Terra Fire typing Pokemon, because this team really just has Rapid Move for it. And then finally, we do have Fluttermane. This is going to be a Choice Specs Booster Speed set. Unlike the other team, though, we do go with the Max Speed set with 244 Special Attack. This is designed mostly to take on a lot of different hits from really just neutral at full. And then the Icy Wind is going to be great for speed control. This allows Ho-Oh to outpace Pokemon like Bundle from full. So we are going to be doing really good here with this team, in my opinion. And I think this is a decent option overall for Ho-Oh. Up next for our Weatherless Tailwind, we do have Miraidon. And this Miraidon team actually proves to be pretty decent. I think the Miraidon definitely is a lot worse than people thought it would be, but this team does a really good job at just leaning to what Miraidon does best, just hitting hard with its stabs. The Terra Dragon typing helps boost its Dragon type moves, allowing for things like Draco Meteor and Dragon Pulse to be far more spammable, and we partner this with two really good ways to help encourage this damage output. You might typically think that you'd see Chiyu on this team, but I actually think we found a couple better options. The first being Iron Moth. With Acid Spray, this is a great way to just mitigate opposing damage, and this takes advantage of its booster speed here by lowering its special attack a lot, and instead investing into Fizz Death, allowing for Acid Spray to really help this Draco KO pretty much anything that's not a fairy type. And I truly do mean anything that is not a fairy type. We can even go as far, I'll pull up a really egregious example, and we'll calc for something like a Terra Steel Dialga Origin, because I feel that confident in the calc, just that it will at least do over half, despite the fact that it's Terra Steel versus Miraidon. We're going to go for Choice Specs Terra Dragon, because again, this Pokemon is just really, really damning. For context, oh my god, that does way more damage than I thought. So I want you to pause the video right now, and I want you to comment down below, if you've not already left a comment down below how much you think Dialga Origin with Max takes from a -2 Choice Specs Terra Dragon Draco Meteor. This is a timid Draco Meteor, by the way, no other damage boost like Helping Hand. What do you think it does to Terra Steel? The answer is 93.7 to 110% from Draco Meteor. I'm telling you, this Pokemon is a menace. You really do need a fairy type to check it. Not even a really obnoxiously spit F dragon can take that on. I really don't think there's a Pokemon with a neutral or resisted Terra type even, honestly, that would take that hit. I'm sure you could even honestly just KO Terapagos with that, even if it's like Calm Max in its final form. Because again, it's just that terrifying. Yeah, the -2 for context would KO that. And even in the pre-Terra form, with the -2, despite the fact that Terra Shell makes it the resisted hit, you still actually would do 75% minimum, allowing you for even after the -2 on your special attack to still very comfortably KO that Pokemon, even if it got a Calm Mind Up on the following turn. So you would still do like 43% on the follow-up. You could really easily KO that. And again, they're not running Calm, so that's probably just going to KO it regardless, because of the fact that, again, this Pokemon is just absurd in this format. And I really do think that this Miraidon especially is a very, very damning Pokemon offensively. However, despite the fact that we do have the Faker's Whimsicott and the Iron Moth with Acid Spray here, and this Whimsicott can still helping hand boost for the record. So even those resisted hits, for example, if we did fight the Calm Terapagos, for example, if it got to like -1 and we just click to Helping Hand Draco, we still nearly KO it, even with the Terra Shell. So this is still a menace, even in its own right, with Tailwind as well, just being great speed control for faster Pokemon. It's really a hard wall breaker, and we have, just for good measure, we have a Sash Iron bundle. But even outside of all of this, we still have a couple other really important lures here, being Intimidate. For one, we do have Incineroar. Again, great option. We did not need Flare Blitz here. This is one of the only other teams that ran it. I forgot we threw Taunt on this one as well. Again, the trigger matchup is so bad with this team that we really didn't need Taunt and Incineroar to just cycle out and taunt through things. Citrus Berry on here is mostly for longevity, but we also do have a Landorus Therian. And you might be wondering why the fuck this thing is running Grass Knot. And that's because Landorus actually is a really good check to Groudon on this team. This filled a couple of really important roles for us. For one, it is one of the only Intimidate Pokemon that does not automatically lose to Groudon, which is a very important thing for this team. This team is so weak to Groudon, that is a key distinction. But two, if you look at a Miraidon team, what is the last thing you're going to be doing? If you entered Terraing your Groudon to any type that's not ground, you would be correct. And because of this, we can actually go for Fake Tears on Whimsicott as a nice disruption for Groudon and go for Grass Knot. And even if I have to lose Landorus on that turn to make that happen, for Miraidon, that's worth it. Because Groudon actually poses so many issues in close sheet against Groudon. Well, against Miraidon, I should say. That alone is a very worthwhile trade. Clearing through Groudon means you can clear through a lot of the past Paradox Pokemon's restricted options, because if they lose their Sun at that point, they're kind of screwed. Miraidon can still farm a lot of them next to Whimsicott in the late game, so even if you lose Landorus, you still have Whimsicott alive. You can then just go for Tailwind, and Miraidon will claim a kill. We're just spamming Electro Drift very cleanly, by the way. And this team actually does a lot. I think that Grass Knot Landorus, despite the fact that it is objectively a weird tech, it has a lot of benefits. And you don't even need Terra Grass for that, by the way. The Terra Grass here is mostly for like an Urshifu matchup check, but you really don't even need it. The -2 will just KO max HP Force Spin F Groudon with the -2 from Fake Tears. So you can do a lot of damage, and I think this Pokemon has a lot of merit, in my opinion. I think it's a really, really interesting niche, but this thing also did not need Terra Blast flying on this team. This team really does not have Grass type issue. With Iron Moth, Incineroar, and Iron Bundle, frankly, besides Rillaboom, most people are not bringing their Grass type. And even against Rillaboom, I can kind of just Volt Switch on that, expecting the switch, and just keep cycling out my terrain until I kill Rillaboom, which should be a pretty easy thing to do with this sort of archetype. Very damning team, but it is... I won't act like it's an easy team to use. I've had a lot of success with it, but it is definitely on the more difficult end for sure. Up next, we're going to be moving into the Rain Tailwind teams, and starting off, we have definitely one of the worst restricteds that I ended up finding at all. This is in our second lowest tier of restricteds for sure, but it is, despite that, still not a good option in my opinion, being Zekrom. The Terra Grass, of course, this helps a lot with the Groudon matchup for the ground type moves, and you might think, oh, okay, well, you know, bulky Zekrom could be decent. You could still go with Clear Amulet for sure. Faye and I want to try and be a little bit different because we do have the Cure in Black, though again, Dragon Dance with Bolt Strike, Dragon Move, and protecting the Clear Amulet. It could, in theory, do some decent work. The issue being is that Zekrom's Dragon and Electric is definitely not as valuable. So having like Crunch for Calyrex makes this a decent sponge. We have Volt Switch for pivoting. The Rillaboom also helps a lot with the defensive merit of this team, giving us a nice pivot to Fake Out cycle. We have Landorus, which takes advantage greatly of the Tornadus Rain, as well as Urshifu Rapid, which again takes great advantage of that Tornadus Rain. And finally, we have Asui and Arcanine, again another great Intimidate Pokemon, and this can claim a lot of good kills. The biggest issue with Zekrom is the fact that I actually found like this was the hardest restricted Pokemon to bring to any given game. I think it very well could have maybe felt on the fact that we didn't really fight Calyrex Ghost when I played this Pokemon. The ones that we did had really good counterplay to Zekrom outside of that. But even still, I found it was just better to bring the non-restricted tier. I felt even Cosmoem had more merit in some games than Zekrom, though I think Zekrom still conceptually is a better Pokemon. It's still better than like Mewtwo, Lugia, Giratina, etc. The issue being though is that this Pokemon is definitely really hard to use. I think maybe, again, that could just be on the set, but I don't think Clear Amulet really benefited this team much anyway. And again, I think it's more so just Zekrom's typing not being valuable. It's for the same reasons I thought Miraidon was a lot worse than a lot of people were giving credit for. It's just a really hard type to make work right now if you're not Raging Bull. Despite that though, I think the team has some merit. It's just not a great Pokemon overall. Now we have to get into one of the most washed Pokemon of all time, being Zacian Crowned. My goodness, Zacian honestly might even be worse than Zamazenta right now. I'm gonna just drop that hot take. This Pokemon sucks. And I say sucks to be fair, it's still in the top half, but like it's a lot worse than you would think it is. For people who might be wondering where I rank this on the tier list later on, this ends up being like the 12th best Pokemon that I ended up making a team for today. It's not a 12th, it's the 12th best on the tier list as well, but like it's not literally the halfway mark because we made 25 teams. This hits 12th on the 25. So it's slightly above half in general, as well as for the total restricted count. It's not that good. Terra Grass is probably the best way to run this. It helps get around redirection for things like Helmet of Moongus, especially for Terra Water sets. Even at +3 though, this thing does not score KOs. And I mean that very seriously. Even Calyrex with Terra Water, for example, does not get KO'd by a +3 player off. Really bad Pokemon. Honestly, this is a really difficult Pokemon to KO. But unfortunately, again, this typing, despite being really fucking good, they really nerfed Intrepid Sword. If they had old Intrepid Sword, even still, I think this thing would at best be a top 10 option. It's really hard to actually pull this off in the Terra format, in my opinion, because a lot of the Terra types do unfortunately make this set not great. And you have to either forego Sword Stance for a move like Sacred Sword to handle steals, or you need to forego Protect, which is really bad. This team does a good job at least at handling steals, though. We do have Incineroar, for example, a great pivot around most of the steals and a great Flare Blitz option. We have Urshifu Rapid, which is great to clear through most of them as well, especially next to the Rain Dance Tornadus, allowing for our Urshifu and Torn to just get some really strong hits off. And the Earth Power Sansir Storm Landorus is also, again, a great benefiter of this rain. Rillaboom is also good for these Terra Water options that would maybe try and sponge the Behemoth Blade. But honestly, even still, I think despite the fact that Zacian has a lot of merit on paper, it is a very difficult Pokemon to KO. And, well, a very difficult Pokemon to pull off, I should say. And I do not recommend it for the faint of heart. It's still a very good team. I think this is one of the more well-rounded teams that we built. There are at least the ones that Faye and I did. But it's really just good Tailwind. And I think that the issue being is that there's better Pokemon for that restricted spot on good Tailwind. For our final option on the Rain Tailwind teams, I owe this Pokemon an apology, because I definitely perpetrated the Kyogre's mid allegations very, very much so. But Kyogre, actually, I think I found a pretty good team for it. This idea came from Bae, who actually found something similar on the ladder, though there was a few different things. He couldn't get the full team, obviously, because he found it on the ladder. So we kind of just built our own version of it. But this is built off of a team that did really well in the Sword and Shield single restricted format, actually, with a couple of key changes. For one, this team does not have a Weavile because we just have better Chiampao. That Weavile did not even have Fake Out for context. So we're actually going to go with a Stellar Terra Chiampao here. Since that was a Wide Lens Weavile built around triple axle spamming, we're just going to go with Stellar Terra and claim kills with these 3 attacks. Really good wall breaker, and it helps a lot with boosting the damage from all of our physical threats in this team. We have an Urshifu Rapid, which is going to be a Focus Sash set because we are Scarf Kyogre. You could still make a Scarf and go for like a Mystic Water Kyogre, which would be fine. I think, unfortunately, though, Kyogre does need all 4 of its moves, and at that point, you may as well go with a Scarf. But it is still an option. If anything, I would actually ditch Ice Beam in this format, because Thunder is so needed for Welpon, and despite the fact that Ice Beam helps a lot with Raging Bolt, you still at least have Pow for that, which is pretty decent. For Welpon, despite the fact that, you know, it is weaker to things like Rillaboom and Urshifu, those are, well, Rillaboom and Serena, those are neutral hits, and Welpon also still poses a lot of threats to Urshifu Rapid too. So you really do need to kind of go with these, like, the 4 attacks here, in my opinion. But the Urshifu Rapid benefits a lot from the POW. This is a great lead if we're not going to lead off with Tailwind. We do have Rillaboom as well as a great pivot here, and this is overall just a really good clearing option for a lot of different water types that would try and sponge Kyogre. We have Serena here, which is really the thing that ties this whole team together. The helping hand boost this thing provides actually gives the team a really high damage output. Serena is also a great way to clear through most opponents with extra priority Grassy Glide. Triple Axle is really helpful for clearing through Raging Bolt, whether they Terra into grass or not, unless it's Terra Fairy, which at that point, again, Kyogre just massacres that much more easily at that point next to Serena, and Taunt is really good to stop opposing Trick Room teams. Finally, we do have Tornadus here. This is a great extra Rain Dance option, and we threw on Icy Wind over Protect. This is mostly because this Torn is playing a lot more offensively than a lot of our other Tornaduses, mostly trying to bank on spamming Bleak Wind and Icy Wind because it doesn't need to immediately set Rain Turn 1. This can either go for Icy Wind to get past faster Scarf options, or just go for Bleak Wind and try and benefit by clearing the grass types for this. It's a really good team, honestly. I think that I kind of slept on Kyogre a bit. I really did not think it would be that good, though I think that it will go down a bit in usage for sure once the 2 restricted format comes and teams can just start stacking like Groudon, Koraidon, for example. Until then, though, I think Kyogre actually has some merit. It's still a barely top 10 Pokemon, but it's not bad. This team actually, I think, takes a lot of good advantage of it. So you can maybe throw in a Lecky as well over something like Champao, or maybe even over like the Urshifu Rapid. And Lecky could maybe do some work too and fill those similar roles of just being a really good fast Pokemon for the team. But I don't know. I think the team overall is really good as is. With just 5 teams left, we're going to go into our Sun archetype, which is going to be our second to last archetype we're going to go over today. The last one will just literally be unassorted because I did not have places to put them. We're going to start off with the Reshiram team. Now, this spread is the exact same spread that we had on Zekrom, but we moved the attack to special attack. I think Reshiram takes a lot better advantage of the Terra Grass typing as well as just Terra in general. With these 4 attacks, it does a lot. The issue being is that Wide Guard is very prevalent, and Reshiram loses a lot of good Wide Guard Pokemon. For example, Lunala can Meteor Beam you pretty confidently. Calyrex Shadow will just out-damage you next to Wide Guard Mienshao, and it's a pretty difficult thing to pull off. So unfortunately, you really cannot afford Heat Wave, because you need the coverage, and you can really only go with 1 Fire-type move here. Blue Flare also has a worse accuracy rate than Heat Wave, and going for something like Fusion Flare, you really do not get the high damage output needed for Reshiram, especially with the Assault Vest set. We have Torkoal here as a nice support option though. Body Press is great at giving this team an actual physical means of handling threats. And this essentially is just Wolf's Executor team with a few minor changes, mostly in spreads, because this Flutterman, again, it's mostly needed for speed control here. With Icy Wind, Moonblast, and Shadow Ball, we have a pivoting Incineroar with Terra Ghost to get around Fake Out Pressure, because this team does not have anti-priority, and this Incineroar does not have Protect. There's very few Pokemon on the team with Protect, actually. I think it's literally just these 2, and then the Tornadus as well. Which opts for a more offensive Tornadus designed to mostly pursue KOing Urshifu with the modest Bleak Wind, because this team is pretty weak to Urshifu. It might not look like it, but Urshifu can definitely get some serious damage. Specifically, if we lose Torkoal, if they go for a very advantageous Rain Dance, suddenly we could lose our Sunsetters very quickly, and by having this Bleak Wind Storm to at least take advantage of that, if they maybe choose to go for Rain Dance over a Tailwind, or if they're just in a Tailwind mirror and they're not Scarf Urshifu, or even if we just go with Terra Grass Torn, it's kind of a nice saving grace there to help give our Sunsetters a little bit more of a chance here. Finally, though, we do have Raging Bolt with the Magnet Terra Electric set, really just leaning into heavy damage Thunderclap here. It's a really great wall breaker, and it helps go through a lot of bulky waters in case I don't want to go for Terra Grass on the Reshiram. And I think overall, this set of 6 is pretty good. The issue being is that Reshiram sucks. But for a Reshiram team, it's pretty good. Takes advantage greatly as well of opposing Sun teams from Groudon and Koraidon, meaning you don't even usually need to bring your Sunsetter to be viable. Or if you do bring something like a Tornadus, you could still just go for a Tailwind, and Torkoal could still just go for like pivoting or like body press and be fine. Now, Koraidon is up next, and you could honestly just run this team with Groudon as well if you want. So this is essentially just Groudon team 2. The issue being is the other Groudon team you can't really run with Koraidon, so I built this one around Koraidon. This is a Terra Fire set with Collision Course, Breaking Swipe, Flare Blitz, and Protect. You'll see the Groudon set on our next team, and you could throw that on right over this if you don't like Koraidon. This thing has a very big Terra cost because you always need to Terra it against Fluttermane teams, and Fluttermane is still very common in this format. This speed should creep any sort of Fluttermane that would be hitting around that like creeping modest Fluttermane mark. There's just an aggressive creep on most Fluttermane. This set overall is just a great damage mitigator. It takes a great advantage of the Tornadus especially, as you can just go for Tailwind and just really start breaking through opponents with this. It's a great option to clear through all the way up to Speed Booster Arm Bundle, which is really nice. And with Pokemon like Incineroar again to just Parting Shot pivot. This has Will-O-Wisp over Flare Blitz because we do have a Terrifier Koraidon. We really do not need Flare Blitz. It will not hit nearly as hard. We have a Taunt Rillaboom to get around that trigger matchup because unlike Groudon, this team has no trigger matchup. If we had Groudon here, it would have one. This team really does not. We also do have a Speed Booster Fluttermane designed to try and get us a really good just speed control option overall. This is a really, really good damage mitigator for the team. But this, regardless, will be a great Icy Wind option for Koraidon. It will always outpace because of the Photosynthesis speed, and you'll be able to get some really good just wall breaking with these two. Raging Bolt is great around the water types, so it maybe sponge through things like Terra, Fire, Flare Blitz, and it overall just gives this team a really good priority option. I still do recommend Groudon typically, but Koraidon is really good on a team like this still. I know I was shitting on it a lot, but it's still a top 10 Pokemon for sure, just because it's at Sun and it has really good wall breaking potential while being fast. Now, this Groudon team is pretty cool. This segues both from the end of our Sun teams into the start of our Howl teams, actually, because we do have 2 Howl teams, funny enough. So this is a Gouging Fire Howl team. Groudon really does fit well on this, and it's a phenomenal partner for Gouging Fire. You could technically throw Gouging Fire on a Koraidon team. I don't think it's really a hindrance, but it's just kind of redundant because you're getting really weak to things like dragons, especially because there are a lot of dragons in this format because most restricteds are. With Gouging Fire and Groudon, you get a lot of mileage. This Terrifier Groudon is great around most Pokemon that would try and take advantage of the Sun Boost, allowing you a very good defensive resistance for that, as well as also just a great typing to avoid burns. The Heat Crash, Rock Slide, and Precipice Blades is really damning. It is so hard to switch around this. And with the 112 speed, you take advantage greatly of things like Icy Wind, allowing you to just outpace most Pokemon and kind of just clean through games. Gouging Fire is Terra Grass, mostly to help defensively against Groudon because you don't take a lot from Heat Crash, and you also just get a really good typing around Precipice Blades. And with the Citrus Berry, you can just recover back pretty quickly. Next to Groudon, you don't really need a Photosynthesis booster item, so instead we're just going to go with the Speed Boost investment, allowing you a very fast Howl Setter, as well as with the Speed Booster Fluttermane, allowing you great damage mitigation. The reason why this one doesn't go as bulky as the other Fluttermane did is because this one definitely, unlike with Groudon, I can see myself leading off with this without actually needing Sun on the field. Typically with the Fluttermane and Groudon, that's usually a lead for the team. Groudon is definitely more of like a backliner, with Fluttermane being a cleaner, or like Groudon Gouging Fire is the lead, Fluttermane comes in afterwards, and Sun might end by that point. So having this, especially without Tailwind, is still really invaluable. We have the Rillaboom here as a great pivot option. This is high horsepower to help get around the fire types my Sponge's team. And with Terra Fire defensively, you can kind of just start taking this fire type attacks as well. We have Raging Bolt with the Magnet Terra Fairy. Unlike the other team that leaned into the Terra Electric, this one's more meant to just be a bulky option for the team. You could still go with Terra Electric, but the fact that this team just has a lot less for offensively handling dragons outside of just Fluttermane, I felt like this was still a decent option because at least like Koraidon has a Dragon Stab to pressure most dragons. It's really just the Breaking Swipe, Gouging Fire, which is definitely weaker than Koraidon will be. And then it also its potential to get bullied while going for Howl. You're probably not clicking Breaking Swipe as often as you would on Koraidon with this because you're mostly going for Howl, meaning that this Raging Bolt with Terra Fairy is definitely more valuable here. Though Electric is still not bad. We also do have Umbreon though, and I think Umbreon in particular helps a lot with this because this team has some decent ways to just boost through physical threats. And in physical versus physical mirrors, this Umbreon can put up some really good foul play pressure, while also having Snarl to punish through most special attackers like Calyrex and Lunala, giving you a really great way, if they're not going for Wide Guard Pokemon, to just lower their special attack and punish them. We have Terra Poison, which is going to be great for incoming fighting type attacks, and Taunt is really good for the trickery matchup, while giving us Moonlight to help give you some sustain. This Umbreon is a good sleeper pick. It's always been a great partner for Groudon, and I think this is a good team to really showcase why Umbreon could have some merit. It's not to say Umbreon will be like a viable Pokemon, well, a super viable Pokemon, I should say, but if it's going to be good next to anything, it probably will be Groudon. And I think Umbreon, the last time it did good at Worlds was next to Groudon in 2019. So if anything, this is its tier. Now, these last two teams are kind of our unsorted teams before I get into the order of where I would rank everything. Starting off, we do have a Terra Steel Giratina Origin team. This is definitely the better Giratina form for sure. I think you could make a case for either Palkia or Dialga running their base forms over Origin. In this case, I really would never run Giratina Origin because this actually could take advantage of Terra, and it suddenly becomes a Calyrex Ice check if they're not running close combat. And I say that because typically they're going with high horsepower as it's better at covering things like fire types, while also still hitting the steals. But this is actually a really decent check. I won't lie, if they're not going for Terra Fire, you get a free Wisp buff, and you could suddenly start sponging their hits very confidently. I found that with just the Terra Steel alone, I'm getting 3 KO'd by like +1 Calyrex Ice with Terra Ice. So it's a really good Pokemon suddenly, and the Iron Head is a great way to check that, as well as Terra Fairy options. Specifically, Terra Fairy, Indeedee, and Ferrig were a big problem for this team. So having the Terra Steel Iron Head was actually a really good way to combat that, while still having Shadow Sneak for priority and Breaking Swipe for damage mitigation. This also functions with Gouging Fire. This is just the same set, but we have Terra Fairy and Booster Energy over the Citrus Berry Terra Grass, because this team really doesn't care about Groudon, and the Dragon types are way more threatening, as we could potentially not be able to Terra Giratina, and Gouging Fire at least is still a backup option for that. Overall, this still is a really good set. It's just the same set we had on the other team, though. We have Rillaboom, which is a nice Terra Grass option with Fake Out pivoting. Not really weak to fire types on this team because we have options like Tinglu and Urshifu Rapid, so we just went with U-Turn instead. It's a really good pivoter into Pokemon like Tinglu, which can help damage mitigate, especially with the Snarl as well as the Vessel of Ruin. Most special threats are not going to be breaking through Giratina anytime soon. With Stomping Tantrum as well, just for the fire types that might pressure the Terra Steel. This is a pretty decent Pokemon, and it stops Trick Room, which is really good for this team. Especially because we do have the Gouging Fire, Chienpao, and Urshifu Rapid Core. This Chienpao really just kind of ties this team together. It's a great damage enabler for everything here. It really benefits all the Pokemon on this team, even the Tinglu, because you could just go for like really strong boosted Stomping Tantrums into Pokemon like Incineroar and just pick them off maybe through like a 60% into a Citrus Berry, depending on how invested they are. Especially depending on if you're intimidated or not, like it really could be a decent option. And then we do also have Urshifu Rapid, again, a really great spinner here. We do have Ice Spinner on this team in particular, which is mostly just in case a Giratina can't go over Terra Steel, or if we don't have Tinglu on the field. Despite the fact that it's kind of here for Psychic Terrain and kind of here for other terrains, the biggest issue would be for Electric Terrain, because Miraidon teams do actually rip this apart very quickly. This team has really no good Miraidon matchup, and especially if we can catch the team without a Speed Boost on the field, we can go for an Ice Spinner, or maybe if we just go for a good Terra around them. Really, it just kind of claims on Bundle not being on the field, or maybe just being next to like a Tinglu, and we can maybe pull that off with Ice Spinner. and then just go for that, clear terrain, and then we're set. And even if I need to trade Urshifu in those matchups, it's kind of fine, because outside of clearing through terrain, the team doesn't really have a lot of other lines. And this gives some presence in case if Rillaboom maybe doesn't have the best matchup, which is definitely common against certain teams for those Murata matchups, especially with Pokemon like, for example, the Iron Boulder, the Iron Leaves, the Iron Bundle. Like they have such wide coverage, and the Terra Grass Rillaboom is much needed here for damage because this team does not have the best damage output overall outside of Next to Gouge and Fire and Chien-Pao. And despite the fact that this does look like a very offensive team, it has some serious pressures with things like Incineroar, so having the Terra Grass here at least helps a little bit with defensive Pokemon that would be next to Incineroar. Finally on the team, we have our truly just the most oddball team. This is just a really good offensive team with Pao Rayquaza. Essentially just the new Pao Knight. In my opinion, I still think Pao Knight is better, but I think the gap is a lot closer than I initially gave it credit for. Not needing to lock into a move, especially with Farig only going up in usage, is really valuable. And having the Sword Stance, Terra Normal plus Dragon Ascent is really good if you can deny Trick Room, which unfortunately this team doesn't have a Taunt Incineroar. We actually go with AV because the Calyrex matchup is that bad. But this team still has some great ways to just offensively pressure. Dragon Ascent next to Pao can do some good damage with Ice Spinner. And you can get a lot of mileage out of this, and it's a great way to just pressure most opponents. Clear Amulet means you can't really intimidate around this. It just helps give Rayquaza any merit. This can outpace all the way up to like Sash, Adam, and Urshifu, which is decent. We have a Scarf Urshifu of our own with Terra Grass. Great way around Calyrex Shadow. We also do have a Terra Water Amoonguss just to Rage Powder in opposing Urshifu because they do a lot of damage after Terra to this team. For example, if we Terra our Rayquaza, we still have Amoonguss at least as a check because otherwise Rayquaza is our only other resistance outside of Terra. So it's pretty decent. I guess we have our own Urshifu wrap, but it's still close combat week. And like these three are very close combat week after Rayquaza goes for Terra. So having Amoonguss here is actually like a necessity. We have Incineroar, again, really good AV pivot, helps the Calyrex matchup. I already kind of went over that, but it's still kind of decent. It gets boosted really nicely by these two as well. And it's a great fake out option on this team. Clears through steals to make E-Speed a little bit more spammable, especially with Urshifu and Pao. These do a great job at clearing that. And then Flutter Mane is a great damage mitigator, allows for Dragon Ascent to be much more spammable into opponents, and it overall just gives this team a really good option. We don't really need a Ghost move because honestly, we just hit a lot of the Ghost and Psychic types well anyway, so Flutter Mane is really just here for support and for clearing opposing dragons, so that way then Rayquaza and Urshifu need to fear less. With that said though, I'm gonna show really quickly the final tiering results on screen now, in case you are curious about where everything ended up landing on the tier list today. And that way then you can kind of get a good judgment for yourself of how I personally feel after laddering for a ton of games at this point with all these teams and testing every single one of them extensively, how I personally feel about the restricteds. That's not to say that my experience is end all be all, but I am a content creator, so therefore I have to treat it as such. If you enjoyed though, leave a like and subscribe for more, and consider staying tuned as well. We'll be having shorts going up for my personal top 7 Pokemon in the format. Well, the top 6 Pokemon in the format for the next 6 days. So you guys will get to stay tuned for that and really get to learn something new that you might not know about how to run these Pokemon. I'll go very extensively into movesets for those. And with that said, stay subscribed for other content. Kurt will be back next week for a much more edited video. But thankfully, because Kurt got sick this week, I was able to record a video that Kurt would kill me for sending him otherwise. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this little change of pace, much more long form video. And if you want to see more, let me know. I'll do one of these for Regulation H if the hype is there, if you guys really want to see it. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out, guys.